quieres pelear con él? Si yo quiero pelear con él. Acuérdate que él es muy rápido. Si él es el rey de Nueva York, él es rápido, yo voy a ser el rey de Nueva York.
Roberto Duran hated five boxers like nobody else, but that rage might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. Out of bound from the boxing ring and into legend itself, these rivalries were not curses, but powerful gifts that pushed a scrappy fighter from Panama into the history books. This is the story of how hatred became fuel, how enemies became teachers, and how the man known as Hands of Stone turned anger into greatness. Roberto Duran is one of the most famous boxers of all time. His nickname, Hands of Stone, was earned through brutal power and a fierce fighting style. He competed across 4 weight divisions over an incredible 50-year career. But even the toughest champions need something to keep them going, and for Duran, that something was his fierce, competitive hatred for certain opponents. These were not just men he fought, they were men who got under his skin, challenged his pride, and forced him to dig deeper than ever before. The 5 boxers he hated most were Esteban de Jesus, Carlos Palamino, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Each one played a unique role in shaping his legacy. Let's explore how these rivalries became the engine that powered one of the greatest careers in boxing history. The first and most personal rivalry was with Esteban de Jesus. This fight cut deep because de Jesus did something no one else had ever done. He knocked Duran down and beat him. In 1977, de Jesus became the first man to drop Duran to the canvas during a professional fight. For a fighter whose entire identity was built on being unbeatable, this was more than a loss. It was a psychological scar. Duran openly admitted he did not like de Jesus because of this. The hatred burned inside him, and it pushed him to demand a rematch. Actually, it pushed him to demand 2 rematches. Duran needed to prove that the loss was a fluke, that he was still the king of the lightweight division. He won both rematches, reclaiming his dominance and erasing the stain of defeat. The rivalry became a trilogy, and Duran made sure history would remember him as the victor. The intensity of their battles was legendary. Each time they stepped into the ring, the tension was electric. Duran fought with a fury that came from a place deeper than competition. He fought to restore his honor, to prove to himself and the world that he was still the best. The knockdown had wounded his pride in a way that no other defeat could. It haunted him, driving him forward with relentless energy. The trilogy with de Jesus was not just about winning titles. It was about reclaiming his identity as an unstoppable force. Every punch Duran threw carried the weight of that humiliation, and every victory brought him closer to peace. The mental battle was just as important as the physical one. Duran had to convince himself that he was not vulnerable, that the knockdown was just a moment of bad luck, not a sign of weakness. But the story of Esteban de Jesus does not end in the ring. Years after their final fight, de Jesus fell into a dark spiral. He became addicted to drugs and tragically contracted a deadly illness. His brother died from the same illness in 1985 after they had shared needles. By the time he was moved to a treatment center, he was frail, weak, and barely recognizable. He weighed barely 100 pounds and was confused, a shell of the warrior he once was. When Duran heard about his condition, he did something remarkable. He visited his old enemy. When Duran saw the shadow of the man who had once knocked him down, he broke into tears. He wrapped his arms around de Jesus, kissed him gently, and whispered words of comfort. He even brought his daughter and told her to kiss the dying warrior. This moment revealed the truth about Duran's hatred. It was never personal malice. It was competitive fire confined to the ring. Outside the ring, Duran had deep respect and compassion for the men who challenged him. The hatred he felt for de Jesus pushed him to greatness, but his tears proved that it was only ever about the sport. The visit showed that beneath the rage and the aggression was a man who understood the shared struggle of warriors. De Jesus had pushed him to his limits, and for that, Duran honored him. This act of compassion redefined what their rivalry truly meant. It was not about destruction, it was about 2 men pushing each other to be better. Before you go, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Which of these rivalries do you find most interesting, and why? Let's talk about it. After proving himself again in the lightweight division, Duran needed a new challenge. That challenge was Carlos Palamino. Palamino was a former welterweight champion with a strong record. He had 27 wins, 2 losses, and 3 draws, making him a formidable opponent. He was not the most famous fighter, but he was a serious test. Duran needed to prove that his power and style could work at a higher weight class. If he could not beat Palamino, he would never get the chance to face bigger stars like Sugar Ray Leonard. The fight happened in 1979 at Madison Square Garden. Duran, who had a record of 67 wins and only 1 loss at the time, delivered a dominant performance. He dismantled Palamino and proved he was a real threat at welterweight. This was not just a win, it was a statement. Duran's hatred for Palamino was different from his hatred for de Jesus. It was not personal. It was the hatred of a fighter who knew he had to overcome a tough gatekeeper to reach the next level. Palamino represented a barrier, and Duran smashed right through it. This victory set the stage for the most famous rivalry of his career. It proved that Duran was more than just a lightweight bully. He had the skills and power to compete with the best welterweights in the world. Palamino was the bridge to greatness, and Duran crossed it with authority. Sugar Ray Leonard was the golden boy of American boxing. He was fast, skilled, and loved by fans. He represented everything the sport wanted to celebrate: speed, finesse, and technical brilliance. Duran was the opposite. He was rough, aggressive, and intimidating. He represented raw power and relentless pressure. When these two met, it was not just a fight. It was a clash of styles, personalities, and cultures. Their first fight, known as the Brawl in Montreal, took place in June 1980. Duran forced Leonard into a brutal, physical fight. He cut off the ring and used his power to dominate. Duran won by decision and took the welterweight title. He also trash-talked Leonard before the fight, calling him a clown. This insult added fuel to the fire and made the rivalry even more intense. Duran was on top of the world. He had conquered the lightweight division and now held the welterweight crown. He seemed unstoppable, but then came the rematch. 6 months later in New Orleans, Leonard came back smarter and faster. He used his footwork to stay away from Duran's power and made him look slow. Leonard danced around the ring, taunting Duran and frustrating him at every turn. In the 8th round, something shocking happened. Duran quit. He turned to the referee and said, "No more." This moment became one of the most famous in boxing history. It was humiliating. The world watched as the fearless Hands of Stone gave up. Fans were stunned. Critics called him a coward. Duran's reputation took a massive hit. His hatred for Leonard grew even stronger after this loss. But here is the twist. That humiliation was exactly what Duran needed. If he had simply lost a close decision, he might have stayed at welterweight and faded into history. Instead, the shame of quitting destroyed his ego and forced him to change. He had to mature, move up in weight, and take on even bigger challenges. The hatred he felt for Leonard became the spark that ignited his legendary comeback. It pushed him to fight the other giants of the era, Marvin Hagler and Thomas Hearns. In a strange way, Sugar Ray Leonard gave Duran the greatest gift of his career. The humiliation became the foundation of his redemption. The pain of that moment forced Duran to look deeper into himself and find a new level of determination. Marvin Hagler was considered by many to be the greatest middleweight champion of all time. He was bigger, stronger, and more powerful than anyone Duran had faced before. Hagler was a complete fighter with a granite chin, devastating power, and an iron will. When Duran challenged Hagler in 1983, the size difference was huge. Duran had started his career as a lightweight, and now he was stepping into the ring with a monster. This was a test of willpower, not just skill. Duran listed Hagler among the fighters he could not ignore. The hatred was not about an insult or a knockdown. It was about the grinding pressure and the sheer difficulty of facing such a powerful opponent. The fight lasted all 15 rounds. Duran lost the decision, but the fact that he pushed Hagler to the limit was incredible. Many people thought Duran would be destroyed. Instead, he proved he belonged in the ring with the best. The little guy was able to push the greatest middleweight champion all the way to the final bell. His performance against Hagler confirmed his status as one of the Four Kings, a group of legendary fighters that defined the 1980s. The hatred Duran felt for Hagler was the fuel he needed to survive and compete at the highest level. It was the hatred of a man who refused to accept his limits. It was the hatred that comes from knowing you are facing an impossible challenge and deciding to fight anyway. Thomas Hearns was the most dangerous puncher of the era. He had long arms, explosive power, and the ability to end a fight with a single punch. In 1984, Hearns faced Duran and knocked him out in just 2 rounds. The knockout was brutal and definitive. Duran was dropped twice in the first round and finished in the second. He was almost 33 years old at the time, past his prime, but the loss was still devastating. The speed and finality of the defeat were shocking. The hatred Duran felt for Hearns came from the resentment of being destroyed so quickly. No fighter wants to be knocked out cold, especially by such a young and powerful opponent. But even this loss highlights something important about Duran. He was willing to face the most dangerous fighters in the world, knowing he might lose. The courage it took to step into the ring with Hearns, a man who could end a fight with a single punch, is what made Duran a legend. The hatred he felt was a reflection of the extreme risk he accepted. It was the hatred of a warrior who knew he was walking into a war zone, but went anyway. That willingness to face danger, to confront the most fearsome opponents, is what separated Duran from ordinary champions. So what do all these rivalries tell us? They reveal that Duran's hatred was not a weakness. It was his greatest strength. These 5 fighters, Esteban de Jesus, Carlos Palamino, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns, were not just opponents. They were the emotional fuel that powered a 50-year career. Each rivalry served a different purpose. De Jesus taught him resilience and compassion. Palamino proved he could compete at a higher weight. Leonard forced him to mature and seek redemption. Hagler tested his willpower and durability. Hearns showed the world his fearless courage. Together, they created the legend of Roberto Duran. They were the obstacles that made him stronger, the challenges that forced him to evolve, and the enemies that became part of his story. What makes Duran's story so powerful is how he transformed negative emotions into positive outcomes. Most people let hatred consume them, but Duran channeled it into something productive. He used it as motivation to train harder, study his opponents more carefully, and push his body beyond what seemed possible. The hatred was not random or wild. It was focused and purposeful. Every rivalry taught him something new about himself. They exposed his weaknesses and forced him to grow. Without these challenges, Duran might have become complacent. He might have stayed comfortable in his lightweight dominance and never explored the upper weight classes. But the hatred he felt for these 5 men demanded that he evolve. It demanded that he become more than just a powerful puncher. It forced him to become a complete fighter. The emotional intensity of these rivalries gave him a reason to keep going, even when his body was aging and the competition was getting tougher. The beauty of Duran's journey is that it shows us the power of turning adversity into advantage. Each of these 5 rivals represented a different kind of challenge, and each one left Duran better than before. When De Jesus knocked him down, Duran learned how to get back up stronger. When Palamino stood as a gatekeeper, Duran learned how to break through barriers. When Leonard humiliated him, Duran learned how to rebuild himself from the ground up. When Hagler tested his physical limits, Duran learned that heart can overcome size. When Hearns knocked him out, Duran learned that courage is not about winning every fight, but about being willing to take the biggest risks. These lessons shaped not just his boxing career, but his entire life philosophy. He became a symbol of perseverance and transformation. The remarkable thing about Duran is that he never made excuses. After the losses, after the knockdowns, after the humiliations, he always came back. He never blamed anyone else for his defeats. He took responsibility and worked to improve. That attitude is what made him different from other fighters. Many champions fall apart after a single bad loss. Duran used his losses as fuel. He turned shame into motivation and fear into courage. His career is proof that setbacks do not define you. What matters is how you respond to those setbacks. Duran responded by becoming one of the greatest fighters of all time. Duran's story is a reminder that greatness does not come from comfort. It comes from challenge, struggle, and the willingness to face your enemies head-on. The hatred Duran felt was not destructive. It was transformative. It pushed him to train harder, fight smarter, and never give up. These 5 men were not just rivals, they were co-creators of his legacy. Without them, Duran might have been just another champion. With them, he became immortal. His hatred was not a flaw, it was the engine of his greatness. And in the end, that hatred became respect, compassion, and a legacy that will never be forgotten. The tears he shed for Esteban de Jesus proved that the fire inside him was always about competition, never cruelty. That is the true mark of a champion, the ability to fight with fury and then embrace with love. Duran showed the world that you can be fierce in battle and kind in peace, that you can hate your opponent in the ring and honor them outside of it. His legacy is not just about the punches he threw or the titles he won. It is about the man he became through the process of facing his greatest challenges. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another upload. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.